This episode of the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast was first broadcast on the 21st of January 2016.
Hello and welcome to the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, the bi-weekly show that brings you the best of powerlifting in Canada, discussing trending topics, training advice, coaching philosophies and much more. Our three co-hosts include Ryan Stinn, holder of the heaviest equipped squat and total in Canadian powerlifting union history, boasting a 4th place finish at Worlds and 1st place finish at North Americans. He is also the owner of Unparalleled Performance Training Centre in Moose Jaw, as well as co-owner of Inner Strength Products. Steve Cassioli, IPF World Record holder and bronze medalist at the 2015 IPF Classic World Championships, the 3rd strongest powerlifting in the history of Canada based on Wilks, and owner of Cassioli Strength and Conditioning. And lastly, Avi Silverberg, world team coach and world bench press medalist, owner of Pursuit of Strength, an online powerlifting coaching hub served to enhance athletic performance through programming and educational seminars. Today's episode starts right now.
Hello and welcome to the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to episode 9. Can't believe we are already 9 episodes into this season. We have 10 episodes to round off season 1, and then we'll take a little bit of a break just around CPU Nationals to get ourselves ready for that, and then we'll come out with another 10 episodes. But we want to recap just last week's episode where we sat down with Casey Baines. We talked a lot about how to compete and how to compete at an international level, and about some of their training and perspectives on the sport. And Casey Baines, owner of Epicenter Training, we give away to one of our listeners a Epicenter hoodie, and we're going to do the draw for it right now. Ryan, who won that awesome Epicenter hoodie?
Well, the winner for that hoodie is Joe Reed. So, Joe, I will get in touch with you and get you in contact with Casey, and we'll get your hoodie sent away for you.
Fantastic. I promise that I won't go into any 7-minute rants this week. We'll have a lot of content for you this episode. We had Adam Ramzy sit down with us, an absolutely fantastic lifter who shed some great experience about him and as an athlete, and got into some really great detail to do with his training. But before we intro that segment, we should probably do something. We should probably do the bi-weekly powerlifting wrap up, except we don't really have any news to say. There wasn't any meets. There hasn't been a whole ton of lifters competing recently. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to tell you 30 seconds about our lives.
The days of our lives. Days of Avi's lives.
The days of Ryan, Steve, and Avi's lives. Should we do the caca anyways?
Oh, you got to do the caca.
Well, I don't like talking about myself, but recently I had a little shoulder injury. I don't know if it's minor or severe. Who knows? I'm getting that checked out today, but yeah, that's all I really have to say. Looking forward to Nationals. Ryan, what do you have?
Well, I'll talk about myself because I like to. Actually, I really don't. But to continue the injury train that Steve starts, today about 2 hours ago, awesomely enough, squatting, trying to push myself up to Nationals, knowing that I came off a back injury for Commonwealths and wanted to actually try and do something at Nationals, so kind of pushing a little too hard and heard a pop in my back. And so I guess that's probably about it for squatting for Nationals. We'll see how bad it is tomorrow, but right now it's pretty painful. I'm icing it because Steve yelled at me and told me to. So put some ice on it and take some naproxen and some Tylenol and see how it feels tomorrow. But so we'll see if I can ramp up and do some sort of squatting and some sort of deadlifting at Nationals. That'd be good. My goal has always been to really push the bench for Nationals, and so hopefully I can at least PB that with maybe some of Avi's invaluable advice. Avi, what's going on with you?
Well, I'm going to break the injury train here for just a second. I'm feeling fantastic. My training's going really well. Obviously, gearing up for just the classic bench at nationals. In terms of my athletes competing at nationals, I have 20 athletes who are competing at nationals and across all age weight classes, and hopefully set some of them up for some international teams this year. And that's all. That's all I got. I don't have much else to say. So this week on the podcast, we have Adam Ramzy. Now, Adam, I know quite well. He used to be an Alberta lifter. Just recently moved to BC to do his to do some extra additional schooling, and he actually gets he'll get into what he actually is studying. But Adam and I worked together on the APU executive. He was a part of our board and contributed us a couple of years to doing that. I do remember that Adam Ramzy in 2012 at his very first World Championships, Junior World Championships, he bombed. And we didn't mention that in the interview, that he actually went to a Worlds, traveled all the way overseas to compete, and bombed at his very first World Championships. But you can keep that in mind when you listen to Adam talk and his perspective on the sport. Ryan, what else did we talk about with Adam?
Oh, it was a good competition, a good conversation. A lot around his training templates, his training methodologies, and just about how he tracks his metrics to ensure that he's continually progressing over time and to continually improve or increase the load he's lifting to progress. Adam's very, very technically sound, obviously both in lifting and in his own programming. Honestly, the stuff he tracks, I've never heard anyone else doing. Tracking total reps, total average percentage, stuff like that. I mean, excellent. I don't know a lot of people that do that. So I've started lifting in 2009 and has made amazing progress. The best equipped lifter in Canada, fourth best classic lifter in Canada. It's in 6 years. That's not a lot of time. That's a whole lot of progress. So definitely smart guy. Definitely something to listen to and to look forward to what he's capable of.
So without further ado, let's roll. We have Adam Ramzy sitting down with us here today on episode 9, and really excited to have Adam sit down and chat with us here. Adam, as most people in the Canadian Powerlifting Union know, you're quite a successful athlete, both on the raw side and the equipped side. For those who are just hearing about you for the first time, could you just talk a little bit about maybe how you started in the sport and your progression as you've kind of gone on in your career?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me, guys, first of all. I started lifting, I guess, my first competition was in Edmonton in Alberta in 2009, I guess. And that actually got started because before then, I was a triathlete, actually, surprisingly. I'm about 70 pounds lighter than I am now, and had some knee injuries that made running not possible. So I started lifting weights, and made sense to me. So started competing. I totaled, I think, 462 in my first contest. That was before any equipment, and then at that point in time, I was kind of on the border. There was no real classic lifting at the time, so I got into the equipped lifting right away, and did my first nationals in 2012, and since I've been to the 2 Junior World Championships in 2012 and 2013, and then most recently the Commonwealths in December, where I did 895 total.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's pretty cool to hear your progression in the sport, because Adam, as you know, we were kind of colleagues on the APU executive. You took on the chairman role for the records at one point, and and got involved quite early on that side. So certainly, I've seen you kind of grow from a junior athlete into now quite a successful open athlete. Now, I don't know if you guys know this. I just recently heard an interesting fact here, and that is that in 2015. 27 people died from taking selfies. Did you guys know that?
Seriously?
27 people died. Now, I don't know how they died, but when I think of selfies, I think of pure narcissism, right? People are wanting to take pictures of themselves, put them out there on the internet, and obviously I'm guilty of putting a few selfies out there. But one thing that I know of Adam over the years is you don't really see this guy online, posting tons of pictures of himself and tons of videos. And so, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about, your humbleness as it relates to your training? Because I find that you, out of a lot of successful athletes in Canada and certainly outside our borders, are quite humble for the success that you've seen in our sport. So, tell us your perspective on that.
Well, thanks for wording it that way. I guess it's largely always been for me that, I powerlift strictly for myself. As everyone knows, no one makes money at it. No one gets much recognition. I mean, it's starting to become, moving from a fringe sport to more of a mainstream sport. But for me, it's always been something that, I know for myself that these are my PRs, this is what I've done, and I take pride in them. And it's great. I appreciate the support that I've been starting to get now that people become more aware, but it's never been a priority of mine to seek anything out of anyone else. As I say, I do it strictly for myself. So, I mean, there's been that end of it, and also as well, social media seems to take up a lot of time for a lot of people, and that's time that I don't necessarily have to spare. So, and the other side of the coin as well, if it's something that I can't just quickly, take out of my phone in the training session and put it on YouTube, I don't prioritize the time either.
So do tell us about your time commitments, because we all know that at least Ryan and Steve and myself know that you're very busy with school, you're very busy with work. Can you tell us a little bit about your life outside of lifting and the sort of requirements that you have? Because you're not only an excellent athlete, but you're excelling in other parts of your life as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I study here in Vancouver. I came in September 2013, and I'm doing an unusual program. It's an MD PhD, so it's a double degree combining medical school with graduate research. So at this point in time, my focus is more so on the research end. So I work in a diabetes lab and study therapies to treat diabetes. Actually,
That's unbelievable. Like, how many people are even accepted into that program per se, per year?
Yeah, here at UBC, medical school, they take 254 a year, and then the PhD program, they take usually 2 out of the 254 to be able to join the double degree. So it's a very small group, both within UBC here, but also across Canada. There's about 20 students that do it every year in Canada, maybe a bit fewer. There's actually been recently the funding that supports doing the program was actually cut by the Conservative government before the election. So potentially that might even be shrinking further.
Yeah.
So, but who knows? Yeah.
So what does a typical day look like for you? You wake up, you go to the gym, or you work, go to school?
Yeah, no, life is pretty simple. By most people's accounts, I'm quite a boring person. I get up early and I have oatmeal and coffee and head to work. And whatever I have to do at work, I'm there. And I mean, the fact of the matter is that an hour you can get so much done in an hour, or so much done. So I try and be very productive at work, and then I come home from work, finish work at 6 or whatever, and have some dinner, and then do some training and have a shower, and that's basically the day.
Now, I know we talked at Commonwealth, Adam. You actually, I don't know, I think recently acquired some equipment, and now your gym is in your house, right? And so you have a home gym with a squat rack and some plates and a bar. And you don't do essentially any accessories. I know we've talked about that before. You just do the straight comp lifts. So you do have a home gym, is that correct?
It's in the process of setting up. So far, I have the space and I have the bar and the rack, but I've got to get things sorted out. So I'm not actually training there yet. Hopefully within a couple weeks. Okay. But it'll be very exciting. Yes, and as you say, I don't need anything but an ER rack and a barbell.
No accessories whatsoever.
I do limited accessories. I do some upper back work, particularly paired with shirted benching, and I do some abs. And when I say abs, I mean planks. But yes, that is everything.
You are definitely a man after my own heart, Adam. I'm the same way. I do the comp lifts, I do
Yeah.
rows and abs, and that's about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I got started, I remember, going to social media, going to YouTube, and finding Tom Keen's channel and just seeing how all that he ever posted was competition lifts, or an American lifter, Wade Hooper, I always really enjoyed, and trained competition lifts, and it just made sense to me that, I mean, I don't really care how much I can front squat. God knows I probably can't squat 160 kilos. I don't care how much I can overhead press. I probably can overhead press 80 kilos, but I care how much I can bench, how much I can squat. So that's all I do.
Now, just playing devil's advocate here, do you
Sure.
feel like if doing some accessory lifts, especially early on in your career, when you perhaps don't have the muscular base, you haven't developed any hypertrophy, it might be a relevant point to do some accessories, some overhead movements, some more back movements or tricep movements, or have you ever done that, or have you? And if you have,
Yeah.
it sounds like maybe like now you've kind of progressed, and as an expert athlete or an experienced athlete, you've kind of dropped those off the exercise priority. So what's your thought on that? Do you feel like there is a place, or?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you make in terms of having a muscular base. So I've worked with some friends. I've never really coached or anything like that, but helped them out. And when you have someone early on in their lifting, and the most they can back squat is a body weight or less, the amount of stimulus that comes from that is quite minimal, right? So you need to acquire volume somewhere, and you need to also have the associated muscular development that comes with building significant volume week in and week out. So yes, certainly in that situation, the assistance lifts are important. And I mean also, not only just in that situation, but even beyond into intermediate and advanced lifters, I wouldn't suppose to say that everyone responds the exact same way I do. I mean, I got into pure competition movements quite early on, and it was effective for me, but not necessarily for everyone. I have a good friend of mine here in Vancouver who has put in tremendous amounts of work with pure competition movement and made no progress. So, I mean, again, there's individual variability in how everyone's going to respond, and that has to be at the discretion of the lifter and or their coach to see what's going to be effective for them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So going back to, I guess, your competition list that you do in training, do you do any sort of slight variations of the list? Do you move the bar high bar, low bar? Do you do any pause squats? So I know you might not do lunges or, front squats or anything like that. But what about just minor variations to perhaps work those areas in the range of motion that are weak? Areas where you don't produce as much force throughout the range.
Sure. I'll approach that by lift. So starting with the squat, something that happened to me earlier on is, as I said, it started with equipped lifting, and I got very gung-ho with putting on my squat suit for like every training session, and that worked out pretty good for early rewards. But what happened, I believe, as a result, is that I developed a bit of a skewed strength curve, and as a result, when I try and squat raw, or even now it's starting to come up a little bit sometimes with the suit on still, is that I have an imbalance of the anterior and posterior chain, so I start to have my hips rising and my upper back giving way a little bit. So I have, in the last year, started to work to address this, and hopefully it's been productive with things like high bar squatting and high bar pause squatting, given the nature of how you have the extended lever arm of the upper back when you have the bar sitting higher up. I don't move beyond that, to be honest, just because things like front squatting, I find that they're just so much more awkward than they are any form of stimulus that I don't bother. But that's about as far as I go for squatting. For benching, I mean, I've always quite enjoyed the bench, and I've always felt that I have a very reasonable balance of strength throughout the entire range of motion. I've had some technical issues, I suppose we could say, mostly my own fault for training in a imprecise manner. Things like raising the hips off the bench and not locking out benches, which is again something that I've tried to work on lately. And as well, now with the shirted work, I'm starting to find that my limitation becomes my ability strictly to handle the heavier loads, not necessarily to have the strength to press them. So that's something that I'm looking to start including more board work, more overload training. And then the deadlift, I've only ever done competition sumo deadlift, and I've done the occasional for fun, but just competition deadlift.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It certainly
so,
sounds like you. It certainly sounds like you've thought about your training in terms of your weak points, and you are programming around your weak points. I think that's important, and I think the variations that you're describing are relevant. Now, if you haven't seen Adam lift, he's a very technical lifter. He's, in my opinion, one of the most precise technical lifters in Canada, if not more globally. He's an absolute technician when it comes to his lifts and maximizing his levers. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because you have just these incredible levers that you truly do maximize through certain technical principles. With your bench press, you're trying to leverage everything so that it's the shortest range possible. Same with the deadlift. Like your deadlift range of motion is so minimal, and you're really taking advantage of your levers. So can you talk about how you've actually over the years come to maximize those levers? Because I think it's hard to do, and I think people understand that that's what they have to do, but they don't know really how to get there.
Yeah, I remember this last fall when I was competing in British Columbia. In the same competition, I had two different people. One come and say, they were jealous of my short arms for benching, and someone else come and say they were jealous of my long arms for deadlifting. Obviously, I just have two arms, right? So they're not changing length in between lifts. And I mean, I think that's a difficult question to address straight out, simply because it's something that I've developed through enforcing the skill. In that, I think a lot of people approach that, they have a weakness with, descending into the squat without doing a pelvic tilt. And so they think they need to do, various types of stretches and accessories to deal with that. I've always more so approached it with the idea that I know where I want to go and what I want to do with the movement. So I'm going to consciously work towards pushing as close as I can to the movement. And every time, through the thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions, hopefully I edge a little bit closer and closer every time. So with regards to the leverages, things like, the position of your shoulder blades when you're benching or deadlifting or squatting, right? I'm consciously aware of where I want to put my shoulders. I want to retract the shoulder blades in a certain position, gauge the rhomboids in a certain way. And as a result, every repetition, I'm aware of doing that. And over the years, I guess that has rewarded me in terms of my ability to then set up in better positions. I mean, the principles of so-called maximizing leverages, as you word it, is really about the positioning of the body, right? So everyone is aware of when you sumo deadlift, you're putting your knees out, you're bringing your hips down close to the bar, you're engaging the lats and pulling the shoulder blades in position. And for me, it's just about every repetition, and there needs to be lots of those repetitions, focusing on doing those. And anytime you find your body deviating away from them, and if you're really honest with yourself, most people are aware of them, then that's when you stop and you change the bar, change the weight on the bar, you change the exercise, you move on, whatever it is. It just has to be that every time that's your emphasis.
And especially because, like you said, you don't do a ton of variations in your movement. You do get a lot of practice in those sport-specific skills.
Yes.
Yeah, I was actually curious about that. So now we know that you don't do much like accessory movements and stuff like that. So how do you manipulate those other variables, like your sets, reps, total volume? So how would you manipulate those in a general a week, say a week's worth of training? How would you
tell us about your training template, Adam?
Yeah, well, this is something that Abby's been vocal about lately, is the necessity of logging what you're doing. And that's exactly what it is that I have logs, some on paper, some online, of pretty much every month of training I've done. And I know how many repetitions I've done of squat, bench, deadlift movements, what's the total volume, what's the average percentage. And as a result, I know pretty much what it has to add up to. And that gives you, 95% of your training. If I know that my average percentage on bench should be around 73% this month, I know that my total number of repetitions should be so many for a total volume of whatever it happens to be. Then I can sit down and I can say, well, based on my emphasis and maybe this time I'm going to have a little more 85% work or 75% work. Those are, in my eyes, the less minor selections in terms of on Monday whether or not I do 80% 5 sets of 3 or 75% 4 sets of 4. I think that's less important than the fact that I'm doing 15, 16 working repetitions in around that range.
Mm-hmm. So in a general training block, like you're training off season, like where do you normally stick around for the percentages? You said around 73%, you said?
Yeah, here, actually, I have my program that I'm lifting off of right now. So, for example, last week, my training was total volume between squat, bench, and deadlift of 67,000 kilos, which came from just shy of 400 repetitions, of which there were 112 squat repetitions, 166 bench repetitions, and 109 deadlift repetitions. And the average intensities were a little lower than usual, given that I had a lazy Christmas. The average squat intensity, and remember these intensities are calculated proportional to the equipment being worn at that time. So this is when I have my knee wraps on, this is percentage of my knee wrap max and so on. So squat was 69%, bench was 71%, and deadlift was 69%.
So I just want to kind of recap that, because that makes sense, as we're all coaches here, and we can take in that information really quickly. But for people who don't track their metrics, this might be something new that they're hearing for the first time. And tracking metrics is like the number one way to identify areas in your training in which you can progress. I mean, how do you understand how to progressively overload your squat, bench, or deadlift if you're not keeping track of your core metrics? And so it sounds like what you're doing, and what what high-level powerlifters are doing in general, are tracking their total volume. So that's the tonnage. And we talked in episode 3 with Tom Keane about how he tracks his tonnage as well, which is your sets multiplied by your reps multiplied by your bar load. And so when you said that you did 69,000 kilos. Right. For all 3 lifts, that's how that metric is calculated. But then you also take a look at, okay, how many total reps are you doing to get to that volume? Because you could do workouts where it's 5x5 or 5x4, or you could do workouts that's 5x10 reps, and you're going to be doing a heck of a lot more reps to get to that volume than doing low reps. So there's some context there when you actually have the understanding of how many reps you've completed, and then also your average intensities across the board. And I'm loving that you're telling us that your average intensities are, at least for last week's training, are between 69 and 73%, because I think a lot of athletes would expect that your average intensities throughout the week should be a lot higher. And so you're not actually doing a ton of percentages. Your peak percentages aren't above 85%. You're not going there very often.
Curious about something. So your average intensity is like, for example, like between 69 75%. Yeah. So during the week, would you probably go over 80% at times. So would you hit like some heavy singles throughout the week for the lifts, or?
So the way I track that is every set over 50% goes into that calculation.
Okay.
And as far as heavy singles, it's very rare. And the reason I approach it that way is that, again, I view it as a practice, whether you call it working out or training or whatever, it's practice is what it is. And for me, if I go in and I do a practice rep at 95% in the squat, that's great and that's useful and it has its place. But if I do that every week, it's going to have so many detriments that I'm going to lose the ability to do 15 reps of 80% practice. Mm-hmm. And to my eyes, the 15 reps of 80% practice is way more meaningful. It's going to have more rewards. So no, very little singles, lots of work from 75 to 83%.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, and when I look at other people's training programs, a lot of people, it seems to be quite popular these days where you build to a top set. It doesn't necessarily have to be a single, could be a double, could be a triple, and often it is based off a rate of perceived exertion. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just a really common way of programming now, it seems. It seems like it's taking off. And then they drop back and do some volume work. Now, would you do anything like that where you're building to any sort of top intensity sets and then dropping back or doing your volume? Or would you say that for you, the progress is mostly achieved through doing, stock sets and reps. So doing stock 5x5s, 6x4s, 5x3s. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, in the competition period, I'll do a little more often where I have the higher intensity sets, which is often then paired with slightly lower intensity volume work to balance out the effects of having the higher intensity sets. And that is actually guided by a form of RP, as you say. I've always done it for many years before Mike Teixeira became public about his program and his RPE system. Where it was like, yeah, I'm going to have I'd call it like a hard-ish single or a more easy one. And I had an idea of what it means or what it meant to me, which ended up turning into, RPs of 7, 8, or 9. But yes, I think that it can be a useful tool when it's used prudently, right? It's not about having lots of RPs of 10 and pushing super hard and then having to, have a load drop of 35%. But there is reason to say that preserve energy a little bit early on, so I can have an exposure to 88%, 92% a little more often, but then still have gas in the tank, so to speak, to be able to then acquire sufficient volume in that more that bread and butter 75-80% range.
So you're all based on percentage based. Do you ever auto regulate at all some days or?
Yeah. This is one of the things that I find really tough about the idea of trying to ever coach someone unless I'm going to stand in the gym with them, in that I write my program and I tend to write them with percentages. But when I go into the gym, I'm not married to my 75% 225 kg squat. I go in and I have an idea of what's the meaningful effort or RPE that I expect. And if that means that day I have to be more like 215, that's fine. It's still putting in the 25 reps of volume if I'm doing a 5x5. And whether or not it's 225 or 215, my body is probably not going to be able to figure out the difference.
Right. So do you ever so if you ever you go on a day so you feel like absolute shit, and so that first set of 225 or whatever feels like terrible. So would you automatically drop down and auto-regulate, or you maybe like you misgrooved it, or you're just like you weren't mentally there? So how would you kind of go by that, right?
I can't, when people talk about, how they misgroove a set, that's a phenomenon I've never really experienced.
I'm right,
If the set is hard, it's
because
I'm tired or whatever it is. I drank too much the night before, whatever happens to be the cause. And in general, I wouldn't get up to the top set then say, whoopsie, I'll have figured it out before. So I'll never take myself to that point, or rarely. So yeah, I try to auto-regulate on the way up more so.
Okay.
Can I bring Ryan into this discussion? Because Ryan and myself and Adam were sitting down at Commonwealth, and we were talking about just at the banquet Adam's training, and obviously it was a really good discussion and learning lots. But Ryan kind of comes from a little bit of a different training and coaching philosophy, which is totally appropriate and has merit as well. And so I think that Adam loves to pump up the volume, and that's kind of one end of the spectrum, right? And Ryan likes to pump up the intensity a little bit more. And so, how can you talk? I just want to bring in the other side of that debate and maybe hear what Ryan has to think about that, or how actually Ryan programs.
Well, Adam's stronger than me, so I'll defer to his knowledge. But no, I mean, I do. I'm when I program, it's generally, especially squats. I'll work up to a heavy double, heavy single, which might only be 85, 87%, and then drop back down and do volume. Just like Abby was talking about earlier, I find my drop back sets can be at a slightly lower percentage because I've pre-fatigued myself by going to a higher percentage to start, and then the drop backs give me my volume. I'm definitely not a high rep person. I don't find I can take it. I don't recover as well. I squat 4 days a week, so I find if I want to do 5s or 6s or 7s one day, I can't come in and squat the next day. So when I program, it's generally in that lower percentage range. I don't believe that for a newer lifter, though. Someone who's only been doing it for a year or 2 years, they need those reps, right? They need the practice. Doing 3 sets or 5 sets of 8, they're getting more chances, like Adam said, to practice everything. Practice shoulder blade position, practice knee position, squatting or deadlifting. So I think at a certain point, though, to my mind, my practice at 75% is less effective than my practice at 87%. So if I can get that practice in, once or twice a week, drop back and get my more volume, which is only sets of 3, right? That's how I do it. Obviously, Adam is very knowledgeable. He's very much a student of the sport, and I will not argue that doing a lot of reps and a lot of work works. It does. Unfortunately, my back has never been good at taking that kind of stuff since I injured it. I used to do a ton of volume. We used to do sets of 16, sets of 8 squats, and then slowly progressive overload our way up to a meet and drop to 5s and 3s and 2s, and so it worked, and it worked for a lot of years. But after injury, I couldn't do that kind of work. So I think the most important thing that Adam has said, not the most important thing, but one of the really important things is that you auto-regulate, right? If your paper says 225 and it feels like crap, you don't do that. You pull yourself back and go, okay, well, I'll do 215 today. Because, and that's, RP training is fantastic, but I don't think a lot of newer lifters know themselves well enough to say that's an RP 9. I coach, once a week at a CrossFit, and I try to use RPs with them because, I don't know all their maxes and people change every week. And but when I say an RP of 8 to them, and then I see people failing, it's because they have no idea what an RP 8 is, right? So I think it's a very advanced topic that new lifters can have trouble with.
And I totally agree with you. New lifters don't know their body. It's maybe that maybe they understand the concept of what an RPE 8 is, which is leaving kind of 2 reps in the tank, but they don't know their body well enough to know actually what weight range they need to be in to achieve that. Now, what Adam was saying is, he doesn't really get too upset that he has to auto-regulate down. I think for newer athletes too, it can be mentally a mental challenge, a mental hurdle to regulate down and think, oh, well, I'm still getting work in and I'm still improving. But how can I still improve if I'm doing less weight than what it says on the paper, right? There's a kind of disconnect that happens. Now, I just want to turn to Adam for just a second and ask him a question. I think a lot of people get confused when we say volume. They attach a volume with high reps. Right. And they think that high reps is high volume, and certainly it is, but you can still have a high volume program and run a more moderate or even a low rep range if you're getting enough frequency and enough sets. So it doesn't sound like you do a ton of high rep training, and it sounds like you're actually getting your volume through a somewhat moderate rep range. Mm-hmm. Do you keep track of your average reps for squat, bench, and deadlift, or could you just kind of anecdotally tell us what might those be? Where are you working? Yeah. What rep range are you working in for the most part?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. I was thinking the same thing as Ryan was talking. The vast majority of my work is between doubles and 5s. Probably the staple is triples. Yeah, 80% triples is like tons of my training sessions. 5 sets of 3 at 80%, 7 sets of 3 at 80%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So probably the average is 3.5 reps a set, something like that. Yeah. Maybe 4 if you include my warm-ups as well. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I agree. And I just know that when Tom was on and he talked about his average volume, he talked about it's so high because, he would do, 3 sets of 10 in some workouts, right? Which, suddenly you're getting a ton of volume out of 3 sets of 10.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that high reps is high volume. I mean, volume is all based on total number of reps, right? Mm-hmm. And I agree with you on staying in that 3 rep range because anything higher than that feels crappy.
Especially for a power lifter.
Especially for a super.
Yeah. I'm on that total opposite end over there. I'm doing 8s at least once a week.
Yeah. I think 5s are also really useful for building volume with a sufficient load because you can still do those past 70%. So particularly when I'm short on time, 5s become more common.
Right.
Fives is a really interesting rep range because if you actually look at some of the research,
Mm-hmm.
you can get quite a lot of hypertrophy from fives if you're working, closer to your,
Right.
max, like max weights. You can actually see some sort of hypertrophy with fives.
Mm-hmm.
I want to perhaps just switch topics slightly, and we are talking about your training template. I find it fascinating. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to learn a lot from what you're saying. But you also have you've had a really successful equipped career. You just competed at the Commonwealth Powerlifting Championships, won best lifter there. You're ranked a number one on the all-time equipped rankings in Canada, so the best equipped lifter we've ever had. You are really successful on the raw side as well. Recently, in the last couple of years, you've done some raw meets and have put up some massive numbers. And I don't really know where you are on the raw rankings. I think you're third, are you not?
Fourth.
Fourth, okay. So I
Bump me
mean,
up third,
there's a lot of fantastic athletes on that
Sure.
raw list, and even just to be in the top, five there is quite quite successful. So, how do you balance those two in your training? There's a lot of raw lifters right now who are thinking about getting into equipped, or who are getting into equipped, like Steve, but are struggling in some sense to kind of balance the two. How do you periodize that, I guess, when you're looking at your competition schedule? Would you do a ton of raw training and then stop the raw training and then just do the gear training, or would you try to mesh them in some way? How would you do that?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Let me start by saying that equipped training is a lot of work. It is uncomfortable. It takes a lot. Yes, I see Steve smirking at that. It takes a lot of time, is the thing. And as a result of the fact that you're wearing knee wraps in a squat suit, it involves heavier loads. So just like we talked about regulating our intensity when we train, there's also the fact of regulating absolute load, which is to say that you have to adapt to 80% with a suit is, you're 80% without a suit, but with an extra 50 kilos on it. So you literally are still holding an extra 50 kilos, even though it's still 80%.
Sure.
And in fact, in my opinion, building the load is the more challenging, peak than building the percentages. So when I have to prepare to squat, over 700 with a suit on, that takes a lot of preparation. Now, in terms of how that weaves in with the training, it's something that I've fiddled with a lot over the years, and I can't say I have a firm schedule that I follow. I think, though, we'll start with the easy one. With the deadlift, a deadlift suit is very minimal. It doesn't really affect the motor pattern, assuming you have a good, strong setup and you're in control of your body position. I deadlift with a suit like once or twice before a meet. That's all it is. Potentially, I could do better, but that's how I do it. And then the bench is something that's, as Abby knows, is something that's I've struggled with, largely because of the way I train, in that I train by myself. I've never really had a training partner, and I train in whatever facility I can have a bench to lay down on. So my bench training with the shirt has been tough because I don't have the resources to do heavy board work on a very regular basis, things like that. But the way I have tried to integrate it is keeping the shirted work to approximately once a week, around 8 sessions before a major competition usually, and most of those sessions the bar won't touch the chest. It'll still be about trying to just hold on to the heavier weights, and if I'm getting it to a 1 or a 2 board, I'm still holding 240 kilos in my hand or whatever. But still, the bulk of my volume still comes from raw training. Many people's favorite bencher is Fredrik Smulto, the Finnish gentleman who benched over 400 kilos. And you watch him train, and like 98% of his training is him just banging out ridiculous quantities of raw training. Because, when I'm pushing a bar from my chest and locking out my elbows, whether or not I have a shirt on, it's still pretty darn close to the same thing. So I still think that the bulk needs to come from raw, but that's an area I'd like to work on, is getting more work in with the shirt. And then for the squat, I think that something I got actually from Tom Keane is that belt wrap work is really the staple, which is to say wearing a belt and knee wraps, but no squat suits. I think that the extra load it affords is meaningful enough that it's not so far away from your fully equipped lift, but the load is not so high that it becomes a detriment and you have to sacrifice total volume and number of training sessions and time as well. So I do a lot of belt wrap work. Probably in a, let's say, we'll call it off season, so more than 12 weeks away from a competition, I would probably, assuming I don't have any raw competitions in that period, I'd be doing, belt wrap work twice a week and then beltless work once a week, something like that. When I start to try and weave in, as you alluded to, and obviously this is a complicated question for me, the classic competitions, I kind of have just chucked them in the middle of the training cycle. They haven't been like a major priority that I've worked for. It's just been like, this will be fun. So I sort of take it easier for a week and then I show up and I lift and treat it as a training session.
Cool.
By virtue of the fact that the raw lifting is not as stressful on the body, I find.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I mean, you touched on some great points there. It sounds like you already have quite a high level of technical proficiency using the gear. You've used it for a long time and many years now, so you actually don't need to get in it for technical reasons because technically you understand the grooves that you need to be in and everything like that. But for you, it sounds like what it's saying is that, and just like any other equipped lifters, it's not necessarily handling the percentage. 80% of your, raw or 80% of your equipped stuff is 80%. It's not technically not that heavy, but the absolute load is because it's more than your body can handle. So it's just getting used to those sorts of overloads. And it just seems like this whole season of podcasts we've talked about overload training, and I think there's still a lot to be talked about in that regard. But do you find that when you do your equipped lifting, it is technically considered a raw overload? And so do you find when you go back to your raw lifting, you feel like you can handle weights a little bit better? Do you feel like, it's not so heavy on your back, it's not so heavy in your hands sort of thing?
I think actually when I start having the heavier equipped training, it's to prepare for a competition. And by the end of a full equipped training cycle and then an equipped competition, I usually go back to the gym and feel just useless. 150 kilos just feels terrible on the back.
Yeah.
So I don't know so much that I think of it that it makes the bar suddenly feel lighter.
Okay.
I think more so the crossover just comes from the fact that we've talked about over and over is the proficiency of the movement. If you know how to move your body in a desired pattern with a squat suit trying to push you out of the desired pattern, then when you don't have the squat suit on, it's even easier to keep your body in the desired pattern.
So, do you find that you have to modify your technique with the gear on? Like, do you have a significantly different squat pattern with the gear on versus without? Like, I know personally, I'll squat wider stance with the suit because it protects my hips a little more. Or with a shirt, I usually touch a little lower, stuff like that. Do you find a big difference between the two?
Yeah, the only one I was going to say was the squat. By virtue of having better support on the hips, I can have a slightly wider foot position, and then good mobility in the hips allows me to maintain a slightly more upright torso, which becomes advantageous when you're having, 80 extra kilos trying to leverage your back over. So other than that, though, no, I don't think that there's any difference. It's just harder just because you have more weight and your hands are on your back.
Adam, I want to talk about some of your training. I want to talk about some of your competition goals. I talked to you previously, and you have some quite lofty goals for 2016, 2017. It's just incredible to me to hear that you're actually able to do a PhD and an MD, work on top of that, and still train at this a high level. And you have these high level goals. And so, can you just talk about what you want to set yourself up for? You have your eyes set on the 2017 World Games, and we had Rhea on the podcast, and she talked about the World Games, and it is kind of like the Olympics of powerlifting. It's only every 4 years. It's extremely hard to qualify. The qualifying standards are almost almost impossible for an elite lifter. Like, you got to be really, really the top echelons to get there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you're going to set yourself up for that and some of your goals for that?
Yeah, so as actually I actually listened to Rhea's podcast, as she said, in each weight class, the 4 men and 4 women, there's only 10 lifters that get to go, and they're like a merging of weight classes. So mine would be the 74s plus the 83s.
Yeah, it's merging, and it's all on Wilks.
It is, yes, exactly. Hence why I've been chatting a lot about Wilks in my training lately. But anyways, to qualify, I have 2 chances, and only 2 chances. Hitting the podium in Florida this November at World Championships, or actually, as Ryan clarified to me, at North Americans in Cancun this July, there's 1 wildcard spot for the best male lifter there. So I'm planning to go to Cancun.
So you have to do. So there's there's a wild card spot if you go to North Americans, and you win best lifter. If you podium, so if you come first, second, or third at the Equipped World Championships in November, that's a guaranteed spot in World Game. And then
the only other chance is if I miss the podium and come 4th. But my Wilks is one of the top 4, I think, that didn't hit a podium. Then you also get a wild card spot, I guess they call it.
Okay. So how are you gonna set yourself up for that, Adam? What are your goals here?
My only competition other than those ones are I'm doing nationals in a month, which will be, it's going to be to secure my official spot to be able to go to them. So nothing too exciting there. And then to hit the podium, given the state with, I think Kjell Backlund's competing again at 83, Risiev and Sorokin and a couple other guys, it looks like numbers will have to be for the total around 925 range to hit the podium. So, how am I going to approach that? I'm just going to have to continue putting in the work and prioritizing the training, and I hopefully it will lead to success.
So, I know you train pretty heavy, pretty often, and with the gear you're always overloading a little bit. How about injuries? How have you had to handle any big ones? Anything sets you back, or have you been pretty lucky in that regard?
Yeah, I think I've been pretty lucky. In 2013 I had a minor tear in I don't even remember. I think it was my left pec, but it was just a very minor thing for a month or so. Other than that, some aches in the knees, to be honest. I guess, I don't know, my dad and many people in my family had trouble with knees, so I don't know if maybe that's something that's been an issue. But no, nothing major. A lot of subluxated ribs, though, which are a royal pain in the ass. Very uncomfortable. So other than that, no, nothing, yeah.
No.
Been fortunate. I think part of it is the consistency of the work. In that, the vast majority of people, if they were to go in and do a week of my training out of nowhere, they would be injured by the end of the week. But it's just that's the way I've been training, with no variation, just doing the exact same things over and over every week, no exceptions for so long that my body is just, it's no different than climbing the stairs.
The biggest thing for that too is because people just think that's just like simply just boring, right? Just doing the 3 lifts, that's it, that's all. They don't realize the potential result in the end, right?
I think maybe another part of that is that, like you said, every set you're focused on technique, right? A lot of times people start out loosey-goosey and their first few sets are ugly, and then they try to get serious when it gets heavy.
Yeah.
But they've already done something while they're warming up, right? Without realizing it because the load is too light. So I think it's important that focusing on technique really can help avoid that.
For sure. Yeah, it's the same type of thing. I've heard it said before, and I liked it, that you should never call them warm-up sets. They're practice sets.
Yeah.
You're practicing for the heavier load.
Yeah, I like that. All right. We're going to move into the speed round here. The lightning round, Adam. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I got a bunch of questions for you. Respond in a few words or a sentence, and here we go. Who is your favorite powerlifter? Doesn't need to be from Canada. Could be anywhere in the world. Who's your favorite powerlifter?
Wade Hooper.
Wade Hooper, fantastic lifter from the States. You haven't heard that name in a while, but he is part of the IPF Hall of Fame and a fantastic lifter. What is your favorite workout?
When I do all 3 competition lifts.
Which is almost every day, probably, for you.
No, it's not, actually. Lots of squat bench or bench deadlift.
Who is a power lifter to watch out for in the future, other than Steve Cassioli?
Thanks, guys.
I think Randy E might do some good things here in Vancouver.
Yeah, Randy has competed at the Arnold's a couple times, and he didn't compete there for I think a full year or something like that. But he came out on Commonwealth stage just blazing, putting up some huge numbers in the 83s. What legacy do you want to leave behind in powerlifting?
Oh man, it's supposed to be speed round.
That's the toughest question.
Yeah. Humbly, the first Canadian to hit the podium at the World Games.
Do you read any powerlifting blogs or forums?
No.
Best advice you can give a powerlifter?
Consistency in competition movements.
Bonus question, here we go. Who has the nicest quads in the CPU?
Oh, out of anyone?
Anyone in the CPU.
Oh my goodness. I need to go to YouTube for a second here. What squads do I like? It's got to be like a three-way tie between Ryan, Steve, and Abby, I think.
Ooh. When's the showdown happening?
Yeah, but
think
I
Abby
just
has
want to
any
let all
quads.
of you guys know that I show them off the greatest.
Yes. You've said to me before, the higher the shorts, the heavier the squat.
All right, Adam, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast
Certainly.
here and sharing some insight into your training and some of your goals, obviously, for 2016, 2017. And you have a fantastic kind of giveaway that you're going to do for our listeners here. And can you just detail what that is? I think it's really valuable. I think it's something really special and unique that you're offering, and it's quite a lot of time that you're going to be putting into this. For one of our listeners. So can you just talk about what you're going to do?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is for a winner of a draw, I'd like to work with them to write a month of programming. So if they send me their training from the past month and their next competition date, we can sit down and work week by week to put together what my idea of an ideal training program would be.
So absolutely fantastic, and we'll make sure that we'll do the giveaway this episode. You'll have 2 weeks to enter, and you just simply have to go to our website, www.canadianpowerliftingpodcast.com, and we'll just submit your information, and we'll do a draw, and we'll get you passed over to Adam if you do win. So fantastic. Thanks a lot, Adam, for coming on, and good luck in your training to nationals, and we'll see you again.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Adam.
See you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
So there you have it. That was our episode with Adam Ramzy. So, Ryan, when are you going to do the draw for Adam's giveaway?
So we'll do the draw for Adam's contest on the 31st of January. So the contest will be open for about a week and a half before we close it down and make our drawing.
And just want to turn our eyes forward now and look at next week's episode. We have an unbelievable guest to round out our 10th and final episode for Season 1. We're really happy to secure this guest, and honestly can't wait to record with him. Ryan, who do we have?
Well, I'm still kind of in disbelief. We're actually going to have the one and only Ray Williams. If you don't know who Ray Williams is, I don't know how to explain it. He's a lifter from the States. Biggest raw total in the world, biggest raw squat in the world. He's won the World Championships 2 times now, Classic Worlds. I think I've seen him squat over 900 pounds more times than I can count. He's an excellent lifter and just an excellent guy. I've talked to him a little bit at World Championships in the past, and he's comes across very humble, very, very nice. So it's going to be an excellent guest to wrap up our first season. I think it's a good an amazing opportunity for us. So I'm really excited.
We hope that in the first season, it's okay, 1 out of the 10 episodes, that we bring in an American lifter to talk a little bit about his experiences in powerlifting. Obviously, the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, we want to showcase Canada and the great athletes and coaches within our country. But hey, 1 out of 10, that's not bad. And for somebody like Ray Williams to come on and talk about powerlifting, I think it's a great opportunity. And that's all we got. We'll see everybody next time.
You've been listening to the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best of powerlifting in Canada, hosted by Stephen Cassioli, Ryan Stinn, and myself, Abby Silverberg. Please follow us on Instagram and check out our website for some great free powerlifting content at www.canadianpowerliftingpodcast.com. If you like what you heard today, please rate our podcast on iTunes and don't forget to listen to every other Thursday for a brand new episode.